The sun dipped low over the coastal town of Batangas, washing the sea in gold as guests gathered beneath an arch of white orchids. Elena Cruz stood at the edge of the aisle, her hands trembling around a bouquet of lilies. She looked radiant in her lace gown, but her eyes betrayed a storm she couldn't silence. Beside her, her mother whispered, "You're marrying a good man, Hia. You deserve to be happy." Elena smiled faintly, though her heart disagreed. Marco Velasco waited at the altar, tall and confident, a businessman whose charm could light any room. Everyone adored him, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, but Elena had seen the cracks no one else noticed. The late-night messages he'd hidden, the sudden business trips, the faint smell of perfume that wasn't hers. Still, she told herself love could fix things. It always could, until it couldn't. The music began. As she walked toward him, the ocean breeze tangled her veil like ghostly fingers. Marco met her eyes and smiled, a smile too polished to be real. For a moment, Elena hesitated, but the murmuring crowd pulled her forward. The priest's voice echoed through the garden, each vow ringing hollow in her chest. "I, Marco Velasco, take you, Elena Cruz." Her fingers tightened around his. She repeated her vows quietly, feeling the weight of them press against her throat like a confession. When Marco kissed her, the guests erupted in applause. Fireworks exploded across the twilight sky. Cameras flashed. But deep inside, Elena felt nothing. Later, as the celebration roared into the night, she sat alone by the sea, watching the reflection of lights on the water. Marco was laughing with his friends, the perfect groom surrounded by admirers. He caught her gaze, lifted his glass, and winked. Something about that wink chilled her, the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Ria, her closest friend, approached and sat beside her. "You okay?" "You've been quiet all day," Elena forced a smile. "I'm just tired. Weddings are exhausting." Ria studied her face. "You sure it's not him? I still think you rushed into this." Elena looked away. "He's my husband now. That has to mean something." But even as she said it, the words felt fragile, like a paper boat floating toward a storm. Behind them, music swelled. The air smelled of champagne and salt. Couples danced under lanterns while waves crashed gently against the rocks. From a distance, it looked perfect, two souls beginning forever. But Elena knew something else had begun instead. A quiet dread coiled in her stomach, whispering warnings she tried to ignore. She thought of Marco's mysterious phone calls, of his sudden absences before the wedding, of the way he'd changed when no one was watching. The night ended with a kiss on the cheek and promises of tomorrow. As Marco led her to their car, she glanced back at the sea once more. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter, hers, or maybe someone else's, before fading into the dark. 9 days later, that laughter would turn into screams. Morning sunlight crept through the curtains of the honeymoon suite, painting soft gold across the sheets. Elena lay awake, listening to the rhythmic sound of waves crashing outside. Beside her, Marco's steady breathing filled the room, peaceful and careless. She studied his face, the same man who had promised her forever just days ago, and wondered if she truly knew him at all. When he finally stirred, he smiled the same easy smile that had won her heart. "You've been watching me," he teased, kissing her forehead before slipping out of bed. He hummed softly as he showered, his phone buzzing on the nightstand. A woman's name flashed on the screen, Liana, followed by a heart emoji. Elena froze. The sound of running water drowned out her breath. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering, but she stopped. The last thing she wanted was confirmation of the fear already tightening in her chest. At breakfast, Marco chatted about their future, new investments, travel plans, a bigger house. Elena nodded, pretending to listen. His charm filled every silence, every pause, as if words could hide the distance growing between them. That afternoon, they returned home to Manila. Their apartment, once a symbol of shared dreams, now felt staged, flowers too perfect, photos too curated. Marco kissed her cheek before heading out, claiming he had to meet a client. Elena watched from the window as he climbed into his car and drove away. Hours passed. Dusk painted the sky purple when he still hadn't returned. Elena sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. A new post appeared on social media. Liana Torres tagged at the Peninsula Hotel with Marco Velasco. Her hands went cold. The caption read, "Old friends catching up over dinner," followed by a winking emoji. She stared at the photo. Marco was smiling, his hand resting casually on Liana's arm. The world around Elena fell silent, except for the pounding in her ears. When Marco came home near midnight, his tie undone, he kissed her on the forehead. "You're still up?" "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "Don't wait up next time. These meetings run late." He smiled and disappeared into the bathroom. Elena walked to the sink, her reflection pale and unrecognizable. For the first time, she realized how little she knew the man she'd married. Every story he'd told, every promise he'd made, how much of it was real. The following days blurred together. Marco left early, returned late, and answered every question with ease. He spoke of business but smelled faintly of roses. Elena began keeping track, times, calls, locations, like a detective studying a stranger's life. On the 9th night, Ria dropped by unannounced. She noticed the half-empty wine bottle, the sleepless circles under Elena's eyes. "You're not okay," she said quietly. Elena looked down at her hands. "He's lying to me, Ria. I don't have proof, but I can feel it." Ria hesitated. "You sure you want proof?" "Sometimes not knowing is safer." Elena's voice broke into a whisper. "No, I need to see who he really is." That night, when Marco left again, she followed him. Her heart pounded as his car turned down a quiet road lined with palm trees and luxury resorts. Through the windshield, she saw a woman waiting under the dim lights of the entrance, dressed in red, smiling like she'd won. Elena's fingers gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The stranger wasn't a stranger anymore, and for the first time, Elena felt something stronger than heartbreak. She felt purpose. The night air was thick with the scent of rain and sea salt as Elena parked a short distance from the luxury resort. Through her windshield, she watched Marco step out of his car and adjust his shirt collar, that same confident swagger she once found irresistible. Then she saw her, the woman in red, Liana Torres. The name she had seen on his phone glowed in her memory like a warning sign. Under the soft golden lights of the hotel entrance, Liana looked effortless. Silky hair, crimson dress that clung to her every curve, a smile sharpened by vanity. Marco greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, the kind reserved for someone familiar. Elena's heart sank. She lowered herself in the seat, afraid they'd see her, but she couldn't look away. They walked side by side into the restaurant, laughter floating behind them like perfume. For a few seconds, Elena saw her entire marriage dissolve through the tinted glass. 9 days ago, she was his bride. Tonight, she was invisible. Inside the car, silence felt louder than thunder. Her pulse raced as betrayal wrapped around her chest like a tightening rope. She reached for her phone, tempted to call him, to scream, to demand the truth. But what truth could she still demand from a man whose lies were sealed with someone else's lipstick? Hours later, she was still there when they came out. Marco's hand rested at the small of Liana's back. Their faces glowed with wine and laughter. Liana leaned in, whispering something that made Marco grin. They paused near his car, their silhouettes framed in the parking lot lights. Then, as if the night demanded final proof, Liana reached up and kissed him. Elena's world went still. Her breath caught somewhere between pain and fury. She wanted to burst out, to confront them both, but something inside her shifted instead. A strange calm settled over her. It wasn't denial anymore, it was understanding. The kind that freezes the heart instead of breaking it. When Marco finally drove away, Elena followed at a distance. Liana's figure disappeared into the hotel. Elena watched her vanish behind glass doors before driving off into the dark, her mind replaying every lie Marco had ever told. Each word he'd said on their wedding night sounded different now, poisoned by truth. Back home, she sat on the couch, shoes still on, staring at nothing. The house was too quiet, the air heavy with the ghost of vows and flowers already fading. She could still hear Liana's laughter echoing inside her skull. At dawn, she stood by the window, watching the first light break over Manila Bay. Marco's car wasn't in the driveway. She smiled faintly, not with peace, but with clarity. There was no fixing this. Love was dead. Something colder had taken its place. When Marco returned later that morning, humming and casual, Elena greeted him with breakfast. "You were out late," she said softly. He smiled without hesitation. "Work dinner," Elena nodded. "Of course." Her voice didn't tremble. Her hands didn't shake. He didn't notice the difference, how quiet she'd become, how still her eyes were when she looked at him. He kissed her cheek and walked away, leaving his phone on the counter. This time she didn't reach for it. She didn't need proof anymore, because now she knew. And knowledge, she realized, could be sharper than any knife. 9 days was all it took for love to rot and for vengeance to bloom. The morning after she saw Marco with Liana, something inside Elena shifted. The air in their home felt heavier, almost staged, like a set waiting for its final act. She moved through the rooms quietly, her footsteps soft on the marble floor, rehearsing her calm. To anyone watching, she looked composed, devoted even, but every smile she gave Marco was another stitch holding together a mask she no longer believed in. The days that followed blurred together. On the first day, she noticed how easily he lied. A call from the office, a meeting that lasted until midnight, a faint scent of perfume that didn't belong to her. Elena marked it down, not in a journal, but in her mind. A record of betrayal disguised as routine. By the third day, she'd stopped asking questions. She cooked his favorite meals, folded his shirts, pretended not to see the lipstick stain hidden on his cuff. Marco took her silence as surrender, mistaking her stillness for forgiveness. He didn't know it was study. Every word, every lie, every late-night text was a piece of a puzzle she was quietly finishing. On the 5th day, she began preparing. Not for confrontation, but for revelation. She visited a lawyer, pretending it was for a friend. She asked about marital assets, infidelity clauses, what happens when a marriage built on deceit finally collapses. The lawyer's tone was kind, but clinical. She nodded, absorbing every detail, her expression unreadable. The 6th day came with an unexpected storm. Rain lashed against the windows as Marco hurried out, saying he had a conference. Elena watched him leave, the wipers smearing away his reflection on the glass. That night, she didn't follow him. Instead, she poured herself a drink, sat in silence, and imagined all the ways truth could destroy a person more effectively than anger ever could. By the 8th day, Marco had grown careless. He left his phone unlocked, a text flashing across the screen from Liana. "I missed last night already." Elena stared at it until the words blurred, then calmly set the phone down. Her heartbeat didn't quicken. She simply understood. This was the end, and it deserved a performance worthy of everything she'd lost. On the 9th day, she woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in the white dress she'd worn the day after their wedding, simple, soft, hauntingly pure. She prepared breakfast as usual, humming softly, eggs sizzling in the pan. When Marco entered, smiling as though the world was his to control, Elena met his gaze with quiet certainty. "Morning," he said, kissing her cheek. "Morning," she replied. "I made your favorite." He sat, oblivious to the way she studied him. For the first time, she didn't see her husband. She saw a stranger who had stolen her peace. "Do you love me, Marco?" she asked suddenly. He laughed lightly. "Of course." "Why would you ask that?" She smiled faintly. "Just curious." He didn't notice the way her voice trembled at the edges, or how her eyes seemed to look past him entirely. When he left for work, Elena stood at the doorway and watched him disappear down the street. That night she wrote a letter, calm, measured, final. Not to him, but to herself. A promise that this would be the last day she lived as someone's shadow. Because after 9 days of silence, the storm inside her had found direction, and tomorrow, someone was going to feel it. The letter she wrote that night sat folded on her vanity. its words a silent confession no one would ever read. By morning, Elena's resolve had hardened into something calm and deliberate. The time for silence was over. The storm that had brewed within her for 9 days finally had purpose, and it began with a single text. Dinner tomorrow night. Just us. I want to talk. She sent it to Marco before sunrise, her fingers steady. He replied within minutes, casual as ever. Of course, babe. Can't wait. He didn't suspect a thing. All day, Elena moved through her routines with the poise of someone who had already made peace with the outcome. She shopped for ingredients, choosing the same dishes she had prepared the night he proposed. Every step, every measured breath felt symbolic. The same music played softly in her kitchen. The same silverware gleamed beneath the warm glow of the chandelier. But beneath that familiar surface, something far colder stirred. By evening, the house looked perfect. Candles flickered across the dining table, their reflections dancing in the polished glass. 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 lives about to collide. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air, domestic, comforting, deceptive. When Marco arrived, his grin was effortless. "Wow," he said, stepping inside. "You went all out." Elena smiled softly. "It's been a while since we had dinner together. Just the 2 of us." He kissed her cheek, unaware of how tightly she gripped the edge of the table to keep her composure. "You look beautiful," he murmured. "Thank you," she replied. Her voice was gentle, almost tender. They sat, exchanged pleasantries, clinking glasses like newlyweds again. He talked about work, about meetings, about travel plans, the same hollow monologue he'd perfected to hide his double life. Elena listened, her eyes locked on his. She didn't interrupt. She wanted him comfortable, unguarded. Halfway through the meal, she reached for her phone and placed it on the table, screen down. "Marco," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something." He looked up mid-bite. "What's wrong?" She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Do you love me?" He chuckled softly, almost relieved. "Of course I do. Why would you even—" She turned the phone over. The screen lit up, an open photo gallery. Dozens of pictures. Marco and Liana, the same woman in red. The same hotel. The same lies. For a moment, neither spoke. Marco's fork froze mid-air, his confident smile dissolving into silence. "Elena," he began, "this isn't what it looks like." She tilted her head slightly. "Then tell me what it looks like." The calm in her voice unnerved him more than any anger could. The ticking clock filled the pause between them. He tried again, words tumbling uselessly. It was a mistake. It didn't mean— "Stop." Her tone was final. "Don't insult me with explanations." Marco swallowed, eyes darting to the phone, then back to her. "So what now?" he asked quietly. Elena smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Now we finish dinner." And they did, silently, each bite heavy with everything unspoken. When the plates were cleared, Marco poured another glass of wine. "We can talk later," he said softly. Elena's eyes met his. "No," she whispered. "Later won't come." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing like a promise. Tomorrow would not be dinner. It would be consequence. The storm outside had grown fierce by the time Marco poured the second glass of wine. Lightning flashed against the window, casting brief, sharp bursts of white across their faces. The air between them was thick. Too calm to be peace, too sharp to be love. Elena's hand lingered on the stem of her glass, her reflection flickering in the candlelight. "To new beginnings," Marco said finally, forcing a smile as if words alone could erase what she had shown him. He lifted his glass, waiting. Elena looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she raised hers slowly. "To endings," she said softly. Their glasses met with a delicate clink that sounded more like glass cracking than celebration. They drank in silence. Marco's voice trembled faintly when he spoke again. "You don't have to end it like this, Elena. We can start over." She set her glass down, her eyes never leaving his. "Start over?" she echoed. "With what? Lies? Ghosts?" Her tone wasn't angry, just cold, almost mournful. Marco leaned forward. You don't understand. Liana means nothing. It was a mistake. A mistake repeated is a choice, Elena said, her voice a whisper against the rumble of thunder. And you chose her. The words hit him harder than he expected. He exhaled shakily, glancing down at his plate, the untouched food now cold. What do you want me to say? Nothing, she replied. I don't want your words anymore. I want your silence. It's the only thing you've ever been honest with. The wind howled outside as if punctuating her sentence. For the first time, Marco realized how strange the dinner had been. The way the candles were perfectly aligned, the wine already poured, the doors quietly locked. His eyes flickered toward the window, but she caught the motion. Don't, she said calmly. You're not leaving yet, Marco froze. Elena, what's going on? She smiled faintly, almost kind. Relax, I'm not going to hurt you. You've already done enough damage for both of us. He reached for his glass again, desperate for something to do with his hands. She watched him take a long sip. When he set it down, she tilted her head slightly. Do you like the wine? He nodded slowly. It's good. It's the same bottle we opened on our honeymoon, she said, her tone softening for a brief second. Funny how something can taste so sweet back then, and so bitter now. He looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. Elena, what did you— Nothing dramatic, she interrupted. Just something to help you tell the truth. Panic crept into his eyes. He stared at the half-empty glass, his breathing uneven. What did you put in it? She leaned back, her expression tranquil. Only what you put in me. Something that kills slowly. The lightning illuminated her face again, serene yet terrifying in its calm. Marco stood abruptly, knocking over his chair, the glass shattering on the floor. His voice broke. Elena! She rose slowly, her dress glowing pale in the stormlight. Sit down, she said softly. It's almost over. He stumbled backward, reaching for his phone, but his movements faltered. Clumsy, heavy. The room tilted. Elena turned away, walking toward the window, her reflection merging with the darkness outside. Behind her, Marco's voice faded into a ragged whisper. Why? She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her own glass, gazing at the swirling wine. To truth, she whispered, and took her final sip. Outside, thunder cracked the sky open, and as the storm raged on, the house fell completely silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gray stillness that hung over the city like a secret no one dared speak. The morning light crept slowly through the curtains, touching the dining table first. Cold plates, 2 half-empty glasses, one tipped over, a faint red stain spreading across the white tablecloth like a wound. Elena woke to the sound of silence. Her head rested against the arm of the couch, her body heavy with exhaustion. For a brief moment, she didn't remember. Then, like a wave, it returned. The dinner, the toast, the way Marco's eyes had changed when he realized the truth. She sat up slowly, her gaze shifting toward the dining room. The chair lay on its side. The candles had burned down to stubs, and on the floor, Marco's body lay motionless, his hand outstretched as if still trying to reach for her. Elena didn't move at first. She simply stared, the rhythm of her breathing slow and deliberate. The fear that might have once consumed her was gone. In its place was an eerie calm, a hollow peace that didn't feel like victory, just the absence of pain. The clock ticked softly, each second slicing through the silence. She rose from the couch and walked toward him, her bare feet quiet against the marble. Kneeling beside him, she studied his face, pale now, almost serene. For a fleeting second, he looked like the man she had once loved, the one who whispered promises beneath the stars. But that man had died long before last night. Elena brushed her hand across his hair, a strange tenderness flickering through her fingers. You shouldn't have lied, she whispered. The words trembled, not with guilt, but with finality. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the streets glistened with rain, washed clean of the night's violence. A single bird perched on the telephone wire singing into the gray dawn. Life continued, indifferent. In the kitchen, she filled a glass of water, her reflection fractured in the window pane. She looked different, older, colder, free. The clock struck 8. She realized she hadn't cried. Not once. The phone on the counter buzzed suddenly, breaking the stillness. She froze, staring at the name on the screen. Liana Torres. The call ended, then came again. Elena let it ring. After the third attempt, she picked it up, her voice steady. "Hello?" A pause. Then a woman's voice, nervous, hesitant. "Hi, this is Liana. I've been trying to reach Marco. He didn't come home last night." Elena's lips curved faintly. "No," she said quietly. "He didn't. Do you know where he is?" Liana asked, her tone fragile. Elena's eyes flickered toward the dining room. "Yes," she whispered. "He's home, finally." Before Liana could respond, Elena ended the call. She stood for a long moment, staring at the phone, then set it down beside Marco's glass. The rain had stopped completely now. Sunlight slipped through the window, warming the edges of the table. Everything looked peaceful, almost perfect. Elena turned toward the hallway, her steps light, almost floating. She walked to the bathroom, washed her hands slowly, and stared at herself in the mirror. For the first time in years, her reflection didn't flinch. She took one last look around the quiet house, their home, and whispered, "It's done." Then she picked up her coat, opened the front door, and stepped into the morning air. Behind her, the silence remained, thick, unbroken, waiting for the next sound to shatter it, and far away, a phone began to ring again. This time she didn't answer. By noon, the quiet coastal town had started whispering. Marco and Elena, newlyweds barely 9 days into marriage, had vanished without a trace. Neighbors remembered the laughter from their dinner party, the soft hum of music that played past midnight. But by morning, the house stood still. The curtains were drawn, the gate left ajar, and no one had seen them leave. Detective Rafael Cruz arrived at the scene just as the sun reached its peak. He was a man of quiet conviction, the kind who didn't rush to judgment but whose instincts rarely failed him. Standing before the white villa, he noted every detail, the wine glasses still on the table, the faint smell of candle wax, the silence that pressed against his ears like a held breath. He stepped inside. "Marco Alvarez," he murmured, scanning the photos on the mantel. 33, business consultant. Married 9 days ago to Elena Ramos. His voice carried the weight of disbelief. He'd seen impulsive marriages before, but something about this one felt off. The forensic team began its work. A broken chair, faint traces of red wine, or something darker, on the floor. No sign of forced entry, no struggle beyond what the dining room revealed. It was as if time itself had stopped mid-sentence. Cruz ran his fingers across the tablecloth and looked at the 2 empty seats, facing each other like witnesses to a silent war. "One of them didn't walk out of here," he said quietly. Outside, reporters had already gathered, hungry for a story. The missing couple, they called it. A mystery wrapped in romance and tragedy. Friends described them as inseparable, but the staff at Marco's firm whispered that he'd been seeing someone else. A younger woman. A colleague. Her name surfaced quickly. Liana Torres. Cruz tracked her down at her apartment later that day. She opened the door with trembling hands, her eyes red from crying. "I don't know where he is," she said before he even asked. "I've been calling him since last night." He studied her closely. "You were close to Mr. Alvarez?" She hesitated. "We worked together." A pause, then softer. "He told me things weren't right with his wife." Cruz didn't respond. Instead, he let his silence weigh on her until she continued. He said she was possessive. That he wanted out. And yet he married her, Cruz noted. Liana's voice cracked. He said he felt trapped. That she knew things about him. That line stayed with the detective long after he left her apartment. Back at the villa, as the evening light faded, Cruz stood once more in the dining room. The scent of decay was beginning to rise. He noticed something the team had missed, a faint trail of dirt leading from the back door toward the garden. He followed it to the edge of the property, where the ground had been freshly disturbed. Kneeling down, he brushed his fingers across the soil. It was damp, uneven, deliberate. He called out to the forensic lead. "Get the ground team back here, now!" As shovels hit Earth, the setting sun bled across the horizon, red like a warning. Within minutes, one of the officers shouted. Cruz moved closer, his heartbeat steady. The shovel struck something solid. A moment later, fabric appeared. Then skin. 2 bodies. He exhaled slowly. So much for the missing couple. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The truth was no longer missing. It had been buried. Cruz stared at the lifeless forms, the silence heavy around him. Now, he whispered, let's find out who buried them. The investigation had just begun. The sea wind moved through the palms that night, soft yet restless, carrying with it the uneasy echo of what had been uncovered. 2 bodies, one male, one female, dug from shallow earth, their faces pale beneath the floodlights. The villa stood silent behind the police tape, its windows black, like eyes that refused to witness what had been done within. Detective Rafael Cruz stood on the patio, cigarette burning low between his fingers. The autopsy reports lay open on the table beside him, pages fluttering in the coastal breeze. Marco Alvarez, 33, died from a deep puncture wound to the chest. Liana Torres, 26, strangled, her nails chipped, skin bruised, signs of a struggle. Both dead roughly 36 hours before discovery. But there was one name missing from every line of those reports. Elena Ramos, the wife. Cruz exhaled, watching the smoke drift into the night. "Where are you, Elena?" he whispered. The town was already murmuring. Some said she fled. Others swore they'd seen her near the pier before dawn, walking barefoot across the sand. But rumors were like wind. They carried pieces of truth wrapped in lies. And somewhere in that wind, Cruz knew, was the whisper he needed to hear. At the precinct, the evidence wall grew thicker. Photos of the villa, a burned note found near the sink, traces of blood mixed with red wine. But what caught his eye was something subtle, a small seashell necklace found beside the grave. Not Liana's, not Marco's, Elena's. He drove back to the shoreline that evening, the sound of waves merging with his thoughts. The tide had washed away most of the footprints, but one path still remained faintly visible, leading toward the cliffs. He followed it until he reached the edge, the ocean sprawling endless and dark beneath him. A faint rustle broke the silence. He turned. An old fisherman stood nearby, mending his net beneath a lantern's glow. Cruz approached, showing his badge. "You work these waters often?" The man nodded without looking up. "Every morning before sunrise. Did you see anyone here 2 nights ago?" Cruz asked. The fisherman paused, eyes narrowing. "A woman," he said finally. "She stood right where you're standing now." She was wearing white, staring at the sea for a long time. Then she threw something into it and walked away. "What time?" "Maybe 4. Before dawn." Cruz's mind raced. "You see where she went?" The man shook his head. "No, but the wind was strong that morning." It carried her voice for a moment, like she was speaking to someone who wasn't there. Cruz frowned. "What did she say?" The fisherman looked at him then, eyes tired but certain. "She said, 'You'll never hurt anyone again.' Then she was gone." The detective stared out toward the waves, the whisper of the wind brushing against his ears like a secret begging to be heard. Somewhere out there, Elena was still moving, haunted. Hunted or hiding. Back in his car, he replayed the fisherman's words, piecing them together with the necklace, the blood, the silence of the villa. The wind howled against the windshield as if echoing the woman's ghost. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "She's still out there," he muttered, as the car rolled down the lonely road toward the mountains. A single leaf blew across the graveyard of police lights, carried away by the same wind that once touched her voice. It whispered through the palm trees, across the sand and over the sea, soft, fleeting, and full of secrets yet to come. By the time dawn broke again, the hunt for Elena Ramos had begun. The interrogation room smelled faintly of salt and steel. The fan overhead spun lazily, scattering the cigarette smoke that drifted from Detective Cruz's hand. He sat across from the empty chair, eyes fixed on the small tape recorder in the center of the table. The red light blinked steadily, waiting for a confession that might never come. It had been 3 days since the discovery of the bodies. 3 days of searching, tracing every lead, every rumor, every whisper. Yet Elena Ramos had vanished completely. No credit card use, no travel record, not even a security camera capture. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. Cruz leaned back in his chair, his mind circling the same questions that had haunted him since that night. The dinner, the toast, the trail of dirt, and the fisherman's words. You'll never hurt anyone again. If she had killed them, where had she gone? And if she hadn't, who had? He pressed the recorder's button. Detective Rafael Cruz, he began quietly, his tone tired but deliberate. Case file, the missing couple. Update, suspect still at large. Evidence points to premeditation, but motive remains unclear. He paused, staring at the wall of photographs before him. I believe there was a confession planned. One that never happened. He stopped the tape. Across the room, Officer Morales stepped in, holding a folder. Sir, we found something, she said, her expression unreadable. Cruz gestured for her to continue. It's a voice message, Morales said. Left on Marco Alvarez's voicemail the night of the murders. Time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Cruz's eyes narrowed. Play it. Morales set her phone on the table. The recording crackled to life, soft at first. Then a trembling voice filled the room. Marco. It's me. I can't do this anymore. I know about her. I know everything. I tried to forgive you, but you made me someone I don't recognize. I wanted to believe this marriage could save us, but it's only killing me. You said love meant truth, so here's mine. By the time you hear this, I'll be gone. I hope she was worth it. A click. Silence. Morales looked up. It's her, isn't it? Cruz nodded slowly. Elena Ramos. But if she said she'd be gone, Morales pressed, why were both of them buried behind her house? Cruz didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the empty chair across from him. Because, he murmured, she didn't plan to confess to him. She planned to confess to herself. He stood, walking toward the evidence board, tracing his finger along the photograph of Elena's necklace, the one found by the grave. Beneath it, a photo of the cliffside near the fisherman's dock. She didn't run, Cruz said softly. She never left, Morales frowned. You think she's dead? He didn't look away from the photo. I think she drowned. The wind carried her last words and the sea took her body. The officer hesitated. Then what do we do now? Cruz turned toward her, his expression heavy. Now we find her. Even if all that's left is the truth. Outside, the wind began to howl again, whistling through the open windows of the precinct. It carried the faint echo of a woman's voice. Fragile, mournful, fading into the distance. And as Cruz stared at the dark horizon, the blinking red light on the recorder stopped. The confession Elena never gave would become the case he could never close. But somewhere beyond the waves, where the tide met the dawn, a single seashell washed ashore, cracked, glinting faintly in the rising sun. The story wasn't over yet. The first crack of thunder rolled across the coastline like a warning. Detective Cruz stood at the edge of the pier, rain slicing through the air in cold, relentless sheets. The sea churned violently beneath him, waves colliding with the wooden beams as if the ocean itself were trying to speak. Somewhere in the chaos he felt her presence, Elena Ramos, the woman whose truth had drowned with the tide. For days, the weather had mirrored the investigation, unpredictable, merciless and growing darker by the hour. The confession that never was still echoed in Cruz's mind, looping endlessly in the quiet moments between the rain. By the time you hear this, I'll be gone. Those words had burrowed deep, refusing to let him rest. The storm had forced most of the harbor into lockdown, but Cruz couldn't stay away. The fisherman's dock, the cliffside, the shoreline, each held pieces of a puzzle he couldn't stop assembling. The case file was closed on paper, but in his gut, he knew it wasn't over. Something about it all still didn't add up. He turned his collar up against the wind and shouted into his radio, Morales, tell me you got something from the divers. Static hissed, followed by her voice crackling through the storm. They found part of a dress tangled in the rocks, sir. Red silk, torn but still visible. "We're bringing it in," Cruz exhaled slowly. The woman in red. She was back, at least what remained of her. He drove back toward the station, windshield wipers thrashing against the downpour. Lightning flashed, revealing fragments of the coastline, the silhouette of a capsized boat, the twisted remnants of the night. Everything went wrong. When he reached the precinct, Morales met him with soaked clothes and trembling hands, holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the fabric, red, frayed, and stained with something darker than seawater. "It matches the fibers from Elena's last recorded outfit," Morales said. "But there's more. They found a chain near the same spot. It's engraved." Cruz took it carefully. His breath caught as he read the words etched into the metal. "For Marco. Always." The storm outside roared louder, lightning flickering against the glass. "She didn't drown," Cruz murmured. "She was pulled under." Morales looked up sharply. "By who?" "That's what we're going to find out." As the two of them combed through the evidence once more, a faint sound interrupted the thunder. A radio transmission, cutting through on the emergency frequency. The voice was distorted, fragmented by interference, but unmistakably female. "Help! Please! Not gone!" Below the... Then silence. Cruz froze, staring at the speaker as another bolt of lightning lit up the station. Morales' face went pale. "Was that..." He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his coat and the flashlight. "Trace that signal. I want coordinates within the hour." Rain hammered the roof as he stepped outside again. The wind howled, carrying the scent of the sea and something else, something electric, alive. As Cruz walked toward his car, thunder exploded overhead, shaking the earth beneath him. He looked toward the horizon where the waves collided with the cliffs in furious rhythm. Somewhere out there, the truth was still breathing, and as the storm reached its breaking point, the sea began to give back what it had taken. The tide was turning. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving behind a sea that looked deceptively calm. The sky hung heavy with the scent of salt and smoke, and the waves whispered secrets that no one could quite hear. Detective Cruz stood on the wet sand, eyes locked on the horizon where the first pale light broke through the clouds. The divers were still at work, scanning the jagged rocks below the cliff where the red silk had been found. Morales approached quietly, her boots sinking into the damp shore. "We pulled something else out of the debris," she said, holding out a waterproof evidence bag. Inside lay a small photograph, its edges torn, the image faded by salt water. It showed Elena Ramos standing beside Marco Alvarez. Her head rested on his shoulder, her smile serene, almost proud. Cruz stared at the image for a long time. "This was taken at the engagement dinner," he said finally. "Just hours before everything fell apart. She looks happy," Morales said softly. He nodded, but his eyes darkened. Sometimes happiness is the best disguise. As they turned toward the mobile forensics tent, a call came through on the radio. "Detective Cruz, this is Diver 1. We found something about 15 meters down near the reef. It's a body." The words sliced through the morning calm. Cruz felt the air leave his lungs as he exchanged a look with Morales. "Bring it up carefully," he ordered. Minutes later, as the divers emerged from the water, the crowd of officers fell silent. Draped in a black recovery tarp was a woman's body, pale and delicate beneath the layer of seaweed and sand. Her red dress clung to her frame, tattered but unmistakable. It was Elena Ramos. Her face, despite the swelling and the salt, held a faint, eerie softness. Her lips were slightly curved, forming what could only be described as a smile. Morales took a shaky breath. "Why would she be smiling?" Cruz didn't respond immediately. He crouched beside her, studying the expression that death had not erased. "Because she thought it was over," he said quietly. "Because she believed she'd finally escaped." As the coroner's team worked, Cruz's gaze drifted to something clutched in her hand, a small, waterlogged envelope sealed with wax. Inside, barely legible beneath the smudged ink, were 5 words. "He wasn't supposed to die." The detective's pulse quickened. "Get this to forensics immediately," he said, standing abruptly. This changes everything, Morales frowned. You think she didn't kill them? I think, Cruz replied, his voice low. Someone wanted us to believe she did. He turned back toward the sea. The wind had risen again, carrying the sound of gulls crying over the waves. The smile on Elena's face lingered in his mind like a riddle he couldn't solve. Hours later, as the sky darkened once more, Cruz sat in his car overlooking the cliff. He replayed the voicemail she'd left, the photographs, the confession that never was. Every piece seemed to point to her guilt. Yet now, he felt the quiet certainty that she had been running from something much bigger. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, though no storm clouds were left in sight. He exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What were you smiling at, Elena?" he whispered. Behind him, Morales's phone buzzed. She answered, her tone turning sharp. "Detective, you need to see this. The man from the dinner party, the best friend, his body's missing from the morgue." Cruz turned slowly, eyes narrowing. The smile on Elena's face suddenly made sense. It wasn't peace. It was a warning. The storm hadn't ended. It had only changed form. And somewhere, someone was smiling back.